Washington, D.C., the beating heart of American power. From these marble steps and echoing chambers, decisions ripple outward that affect every corner of the world. Presidents take their oath here, Congress debates here, and the Supreme Court defines the meaning of justice here. Yet, beneath the grandeur lies a quiet contradiction, a city that embodies democracy, but whose residents do not fully share in it. More than 700,000 people live in this 10-mile square district. They pay some of the highest federal taxes in the nation. They serve in the armed forces, run small businesses, raise families, and vote for president. But their voice in Congress, the institution that governs them directly, is silenced when the final votes are cast. D.C. has no voting senators and only one non-voting delegate in the House. Their city laws and budgets can be overruled by Congress, their autonomy always at risk of political tug-of-war. That's why D.C. license plates boldly declare a phrase from the American Revolution itself: taxation without representation. For the residents of the nation's capital, this isn't a historic slogan, it's daily reality. How can the capital of the world's oldest modern democracy be a place where democracy itself is incomplete? To understand how the U.S. only district works and why it was designed to be this way, we have to go back to the founding of the Republic, to fears of state dominance, power compromises between North and South, and a constitutional idea meant to protect the government, but one that left its citizens without equal power. This is the story of how the U.S. built a capital city that governs the country but doesn't fully govern itself. The United States Constitution was written not just to form a new government, but to prevent old mistakes. In 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia faced a difficult balancing act: how to create a strong central government without allowing any one state to control it. The scars of the Revolution were fresh. The young nation had already experienced instability under the Articles of Confederation, where states acted more like rivals than partners. The founders wanted a new system where federal power could act decisively, but they feared that placing the seat of government inside any existing state could make it vulnerable to local interests or even hostility. That fear wasn't abstract. In 1783, a group of unpaid Continental soldiers marched on Philadelphia, demanding back pay. Pennsylvania's state militia refused to protect Congress, forcing legislators to flee the city. The memory of that humiliation shaped the framers' thinking. They wanted a capital under national control, not dependent on any governor or legislature for its safety or survival. So, in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution, they added a critical passage. Congress would have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over a district that would become the permanent seat of government, not exceeding 10 miles square. This clause laid the foundation for what would become Washington, D.C., a city carved out as federal territory, free from state dominance. It was meant to embody neutrality, a place where no state held sway, where the federal government could operate without interference. But that same neutrality came at a cost. It meant that the people living in that territory would lose their connection to any state and the rights that came with it. They would live at the center of power, but be excluded from it. The design was deliberate, yet it planted the seeds of a democratic dilemma that would echo for centuries. When the Constitution gave Congress the power to create a federal district, one question remained: where would it be? The decision would define the geography of American power, and it quickly became a political battlefield. Northern states wanted the capital closer to their commercial centers, like Philadelphia or New York, where trade and banking thrived. Southern leaders, wary of Northern influence, demanded it be placed closer to their agricultural heartlands. The argument was not just about convenience. It was about who would hold cultural and economic sway in the young republic. In 1790, a legendary dinner between Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison settled the dispute. Hamilton needed Southern votes to pass his plan for the federal government to assume state debts. Jefferson and Madison wanted the capital near Virginia and Maryland. The compromise, the Residence Act of 1790, gave both sides what they wanted. The federal government would assume state debts, and the new capital would be established along the Potomac River. President George Washington himself chose the exact site, a swampy expanse bordered by Maryland and Virginia, soon to be transformed into the seat of national government. The land, totaling 100 square miles, was ceded by those two states. A French engineer, Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, was hired to design the city, a visionary grid of wide avenues, monuments, and open spaces meant to symbolize democracy and ambition. But the dream city existed mostly on paper. Early Washington was muddy, unfinished, and sparsely populated. Its governance was improvised, with federal and local authority overlapping awkwardly. Residents found themselves in an unfamiliar position, no longer citizens of Maryland or Virginia, and not yet of a fully formed federal entity. The grand ideal of a neutral capital came with a quiet loss. The people who built it lost the political rights of statehood. In its earliest decades, Washington, D.C. was more an administrative idea than a functioning city. The district formally came under congressional control in 1801 with the Organic Act, which divided it into smaller jurisdictions and officially stripped residents of their political identity as citizens of Maryland or Virginia. Overnight, people who had once voted for state representatives and senators found themselves governed entirely by a Congress in which they had no voice. The framers had imagined this as a safeguard for federal independence, but for those who lived in the district, it felt like disenfranchisement. Life in the early capital was rough. Streets were unpaved, sanitation was poor, and infrastructure lagged behind other American cities. Congress, preoccupied with national politics, often neglected the district's local needs. Attempts to establish self-government came and went. In 1871, Congress briefly granted the district a territorial government, including an elected assembly and a powerful governor, Alexander Shepard, who embarked on ambitious modernization projects. But his spending and accusations of corruption triggered backlash, and Congress abolished the experiment just a few years later. For nearly a century afterward, Washington was ruled directly by appointed commissioners, bureaucrats who answered to Congress, not to the people they governed. Yet beneath this system of imposed control, D.C. evolved into a unique social and cultural hub. Freed African Americans built thriving communities here, founding schools, businesses, and churches that made the city a center of Black intellectual life. The contradiction deepened. The capital of a democratic republic was also a place where democracy itself was selectively applied. Every time D.C. residents demanded representation, Congress reminded them that the Constitution had designed the district for neutrality, not equality. By the mid-20th century, Washington, D.C. had grown into a vibrant and diverse metropolis, but it remained under direct congressional control. The contradiction between the ideals carved into its monuments and the daily reality of its residents became harder to ignore. As the civil rights movement swept across the nation, D.C. activists demanded not only equality in law, but also the basic right to govern themselves. The city's large Black majority, long excluded from full participation, turned the struggle for self-rule into a national symbol of unfinished democracy. In 1961, the 23rd Amendment gave D.C. the right to vote for president, granting it 3 electoral college votes. It was a breakthrough, but only partial. Residents could now help choose the president, but still lacked voting members of Congress. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, pressure for home rule intensified. Advocates argued that Washingtonians, like all other Americans, deserved to elect their own mayor and city council, to make local decisions without waiting for federal approval. After years of debate, Congress passed the District of Columbia Home Rule Act in 1973. For the first time in a century, the people of D.C. could choose their own leaders. Walter Washington became the first modern mayor, ushering in a new era of civic pride and political empowerment. Yet, home rule came with strings attached. Congress retained the power to review and overturn D.C. laws and budgets. On paper, the city had autonomy. In practice, that autonomy could be revoked with a single vote. Later, during financial crises in the 1990s, Congress imposed a control board that effectively took over the city's finances. The lesson was clear: D.C.'s self-government existed only within boundaries set by others. Still, the shift marked progress, a reclamation of identity, a voice restored, and a foundation for future battles over the meaning of representation. As the 21st century unfolded, the debate over DC's political status erupted into a national conversation. For decades, statehood had been dismissed as impossible, a dream confined to activists and local politicians. But as Washington's population surpassed that of states like Vermont and Wyoming, and as its citizens continued paying billions in federal taxes without full representation, the argument for equality grew undeniable. The question shifted from why should DC be a state to why not? Advocates for statehood argue that the issue is simple justice. Washingtonians fulfill every duty of citizenship. They pay taxes, serve in the military, and contribute to the nation's economy. Yet they remain voiceless in Congress. The city's license plates, once seen as a quiet protest, became a rallying symbol. The proposed state, often called Washington Douglas Commonwealth, in honor of abolitionist Frederick Douglass, would have 2 senators and 1 voting representative. The federal core, the White House, Capitol, and National Mall, would remain separate as a small federal enclave. Opponents, however, warned that granting DC statehood may violate the Constitution, which designates a federal district under congressional control. Some suggest a constitutional amendment would be required. Others fear a partisan power shift, as DC voters lean overwhelmingly Democratic. The clash has grown increasingly political, mirroring the polarization of national debates. In 2016, DC residents voted overwhelmingly, 86%, in favor of statehood. In 2020 and 2021, the U.S. House passed statehood bills for the first time, but both stalled in the Senate. Despite setbacks, the movement continues. Activists, lawyers, and city leaders argue that DC's exclusion from full representation contradicts the very principles America claims to champion abroad. Today, Washington, D.C. stands as one of the most dynamic and diverse cities in America, a cultural mosaic that mixes politics, art, education, and activism. Its skyline, once dominated by monuments, now shares space with bustling communities, restaurants, and tech startups. Yet behind the scenes of its prosperity lies a civic structure unlike any other in the nation. DC operates much like a state, managing schools, healthcare, policing, and infrastructure, but remains legally a federal territory. Congress holds the final say over its budget and laws, and that power is not theoretical. Over the years, congressional leaders have blocked or overturned local policies on everything from drug decriminalization to reproductive health care to city spending. The district's elected officials can propose and pass legislation, but a single objection in Congress can undo it all. This fragile balance between autonomy and subordination creates a constant tension. For residents, it means living under 2 governments, one they elect and one they cannot. For city leaders, it means navigating political minefields where local priorities can be used as leverage in national debates. During fiscal crises or controversial policies, Congress can impose oversight boards or restrictions without local consent. Even the National Guard in D.C. cannot be deployed by the mayor, only by the president. And yet, the people of Washington have learned to adapt. They've built strong civic institutions, vibrant community networks, and a deep sense of identity tied to the city's unique struggle. For many, living in D.C. is a form of quiet activism, a daily assertion that democracy must include everyone, even those closest to its seat of power. The paradox remains. D.C. is both the symbol of American freedom and the reminder that freedom, even here, can be incomplete. Washington, D.C. is more than a capital. It's a living contradiction, a mirror held up to the nation's ideals. It is the seat of American democracy, yet a place where democracy remains unfinished. From the framers' cautious design to modern-day political standoffs, the district's story reveals how deeply structure and power are intertwined. The same system that protects the independence of federal institutions also limits the independence of the citizens who live among them. Over the centuries, D.C. has become a test case for America's own promises, a question whispered beneath every dome and monument. Who truly gets to be represented? The path forward is uncertain. Some call for statehood, arguing that justice demands equality, that a government of the people must include all its people. Others propose retrocession, returning most of the district's land to Maryland while preserving a small federal enclave. A few defend the status quo, insisting that neutrality safeguards national balance. But beneath these debates lies a moral choice: whether symbolism should outweigh citizenship, and whether history's compromises should continue to define the present. For the people who call DC home, this debate isn't theoretical, it's personal. Every tax payment, every vote cast without full representation, every law rewritten by Congress reminds them that their rights are still conditional. Yet hope persists. Each new generation raises the question again, louder than before, asking the nation to finish what it began. So as you look at that flag, 50 stars shining over a capital without one, ask yourself, what kind of democracy do we want to be? Should the heart of the republic beat freely, or remain bound by its own design? If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe for more deep dives into how power really works, and join the conversation. Because understanding how the U.S. only district works isn't just about a city. It's about the promise of equality at the core of American democracy.